In this lesson, we will create the first page of our forum, the home page. We will also learn how to loop through lists and render list items on the page. Let's start with creating a new component that will represent our home page. I will call my component Page Home. In my editor, WebStorm, there is this option to create a view component. This will add the .view file extension, and it will also create the skeleton of template, script, and style. If you are using VS Code, you can create a view component file, and you can also have this boilerplate using the tour. The template, script, and style blocks form the SFC. SFC stands for Single File Component. Single file components are special view files that allow us to have both template, JavaScript, and CSS in one file. One of the best practices in Vue applications is to give your components good names. But what makes a component name good? This answer, along with many other best practices we will refer to during this course, are listed in the Vue Style Guide. The Vue Style Guide is a set of recommendations battle-tested by the Vue core team and thousands of developers in their Vue projects over the last years. There are 4 groups of suggestions. Priority A rules, essentials, are a must-have. These rules help you prevent bugs in your applications. Take some time to read them and know their existence. Even if you don't learn them all now, you can come back later when you need them and learn one in detail. The strongly recommended and recommended rules are almost always a good idea. Lastly, priority D, use with caution, are rules that their applicability depends on the use case. The first priority A rule is about naming components. Component names should always be multi-word, except for root app components and built-in components provided by Vue, such as transition or component. This prevents conflicts with existing and future HTML elements, since all HTML elements are a single word. Since we are developing a home page, I use the words home and page. In addition to that, I use the page as a prefix to provide a self-explanatory grouping for all future components that will represent separate pages. For example, page home, page login, page search, etc. For a component file to be used and rendered, we need to connect it to a parent component. We have the app view as our root component. So to display the newly created page home component in our app, we need to import it there. To do that, we will first switch to app view and use the import statement to import it. Now, we need to register the page home component in the special property called components. By doing this, we let the Vue compiler know about custom tags that will be present in our template markup. The key is the name of the element we want to use to render the component in the markup. For us, that will be page home. And the value is the actual component itself. Since both the key and the value are the same, we can use the ES6 object property shorthand. And the last thing we need to do is to add our component to the template. When we add a custom element to the template, it's recommended to use kebab case. So, our element will be page-home. You can also use Pascal case. But since HTML is case insensitive, many people prefer kebab case. Let's check the browser to see if it's imported correctly. Here we have an error. Failed to compile. The template requires child element. So we get an error because our page home component doesn't have a template. So let's add one. Hello from page home. If we check back in the browser, our component is now rendered properly in the bottom of the page. Great. I will remove all the references to the Hello World component from app view to clean up our page. Great. Now we can go back to page home and implement the data and the markup. Our goal for the home page for now is to display the threads and the posts in a form of a conversation. Let's import our data JSON in our component. Next, I will add the data function to the component. Remember that the data function is needed to define the initial data that the component will have. In Vue 3, the data property must be a function that returns an object. In Vue 2, it was also possible for data to be an object, which was a bad practice. So in Vue 3, data must always be a function. In the return statement of the data function, I will create a threads property and set it to data.threads. Next, let's go to the template to add our threads. This time, we want to create one element for each thread and not display all the threads in one object as we did in AppView. I will create a div and use v-for to loop through the threads. The v-for directive is used to render lists of items represented as an array or an object. The v-for directive requires a special syntax in the form of v-for item in items, where items is the source data array and item is an alias for the current element. In our case, the array is called threads. The local element can be called anything we like, even just item, but I will call it thread as that's what this item really is. Inside each div, I will add an h2 element to print out the thread title inside. Let's switch to the browser to see the output. Here we get an error because elements in iteration expect to have vbind key directives. Do you know what this means? It means that Vue is complaining because we didn't specify a key for each div. Whenever you render a list of elements, you should pass the key attribute in order to help Vue keep track of the list. The key should be unique for each element. Here we have access to the thread ID that is unique for each thread, so I will use that. If we check back in the browser, you can see that it works now. And here we can see all the titles of the threads we have in our data JSON. In a real-world forum, you may expect more sophisticated information on the page, such as what posts are in the thread and who wrote them. So, let's add this to the homepage template for now. First, I will enhance our component data section with posts and users. A thread usually has multiple posts within it. So let's add another div inside the thread element and use v-for again to loop through the posts this time. Here it will be post ID in thread.posts. That's because we have the IDs inside the thread object and not the whole post. Let's also add the key equal to post ID. Inside here, we have access to the post ID, which we can use to find the actual post. Let's create a paragraph tag to print out the post text. To do so, we will need to search in our posts array for the post with a corresponding ID. We can do this at first using the arrayFind method directly in the template. The find method returns the value of the first element in the provided array that satisfies the provided testing function. If no value satisfies the testing function, undefined is returned. To display the content of the post, we will use its text property. We can chain it directly to the find method call. Let's see if that works. It does. So notice now how we have the thread title, and within each thread we have the 3 or 4 related posts here. Okay, let's go back to the editor and also display the author's name. We can get the name from the user's data, and we have the user ID on the post object. We can do this very long find here to get the user And once we get to that, we can display the username. And now, inside the thread, before its post, you can see the user that wrote it. This code looks way too complex, right? As we can't persist calculated data in the template's logic, we have to have those repeated and inefficient array find function calls. Is there a more efficient way to work with data structure in Vue? Yes, of course there is. We can do it in several ways actually, but for now, let's approach that by introducing methods that will contain this search logic and can be reused across the component code. Methods is a special property on the component instance. You can access these methods directly on the Vue instance or use them in directive expressions. All methods will have their this context automatically bound to the Vue instance. Let's create two methods that will do the search for post and for user and return the found item. This function will find the post using its ID, so it needs to get the post ID as the argument. We can directly access component data using this. So we can do this.posts.find and find the post that has the specified ID. Great, I will do the same for the user. Now we can improve our template to have function calls instead of the search logic directly. Here we still need to access the post ID. Now let's check how the page looks. Nothing changed in the UI, but we have improved our code organization in the component. We now reuse the logic code in the methods and we have made the template code easier to read.